Welcome to the Housing Shift. I'm your host, Raj Rajendram. Before we get into today's episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Service Charge Pro is the platform helping housing providers fix messy, spreadsheet-based service charge processes. Service Charge Pro was built to make accuracy easier, compliance simpler, and to help rebuild resident trust. If you're in housing and service charges are a pain point, check out Service Charge Pro. Link in the comments below. Right. On to the episode. Welcome to episode 7 of the Housing Shift. This episode is called Tenant Scrutiny, Evolving Power, Real Voices and the Future of Accountability. I've been thinking about that word scrutiny quite a bit in the run-up to this episode, and it often feels like a bit of a negative word, I realise. It can make people feel a bit uncomfortable. But what we're going to explore in this episode is about how important it is for housing and for landlords and residents to rebuild that trust. With me to unpack this very important subject is Alicia Mortlock. Alicia is a tenant voice, scrutineer, and someone who's very passionate about advocating for meaningful engagement and meaningful change across housing. Hi, Alicia. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Raj. Lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you too. Really excited about getting stuck into things, but it'd be great if you could give the listeners and the viewers a little bit of context about who you are and kind of how you've got to where you are supporting people in housing.
So picking up on what you say about the idea of scrutiny, and I think the thing is, it has got a connotation of being something that a certain sort of person does in a darkened room looking through dusty documents. And I was on the board and on the residents committee at Havery Housing, where I'm a tenant. And I resigned about 3 years ago now because I realised I wasn't right for the role. And what I really wanted to focus on was educating tenants, and not, that sounds very pompous, but helping them to understand what they were involved with, what their role is, and their rights, because a lot of them really didn't know what their rights are, and unfortunately, some of them still don't. And as part of that, scrutiny is something that we all do every day. We'll get in its very most basic form. If we get a bottle of milk out of the fridge, the first thing we'll do is sniff it to check it smells okay. Scrutiny is just, yes, it's a deeper delve, but that is what scrutiny is. It's about looking at something, checking something, using different ways to look at it. So I have got an independent role, although which there's something else I'm now involved with, which I'll talk about a bit later. But, it is about having independently encouraging more people to be involved in scrutiny. So that's me in a nutshell, really.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I love the sniffing the milk analogy. I'm going to come back to that later. So thanks for that. In terms of a bit of context then for everyone, I guess I was thinking as well, scrutiny's probably been around in some shape or format, whether it was formally labelled or not, for a long time. I guess just from the word scrutinise, people have been scrutinising their landlords for quite some time. But now it feels like we're in a new era of scrutiny, and there's a lot more kind of focus and a lot more potential power that scrutiny can hold. So could you give us a bit of context as to maybe why scrutiny is so important and has got this focus at the moment in housing?
Well, first of all, it may come as a surprise to some people that I've actually only been in social housing for 8 years. So I've come from a background for over 30 years. I've worked in various areas of social policy, been involved in education, been involved in the NHS through my son's illness. So I am still using the information, the knowledge of other people who've been involved for much longer. And I sometimes feel a bit kind of guilty, a bit of an imposter, that I'm the one who's talking about it when they have had a lot more experience. But it has given me a different view. I have come from outside. I have seen what has been going on, and I have seen what's happening now. Now it is very, very important. And what has happened it's the reason it's changed over the last couple of years is obviously our landlords have been encouraged to involve us to hear more of the tenants' voices. But because, in the nicest possible way, our landlords aren't quite ready to relinquish control, so they've done it through their own resident committees. And I was actually involved in setting up Havering resident committee, so I'm just as guilty as everyone else. But what has happened, and I get this from talking nationally to different people who are a bit disgruntled, former scrutineers, as the demand for them to engage us more in the policies and practices has happened, the old style scrutiny panels are going. At Havering, they don't use the old style scrutiny panel. It all comes into resident involvement, the new committees, their flagship committees, which is all well and good. It is giving a new look, perhaps, to scrutiny. But what you do have is a lot of people who are feeling very much left behind. And that makes me sad because they are people who have a lot of knowledge. They've taught me over the last couple of years, a lot of what I know has been taught to me by other people. And so I feel we have rather thrown out the baby with the bathwater. So yes, it's good that we have got this new, this new focus on scrutiny, but we've thrown away some of the old stuff that we needed, and that is when I looked, perhaps this bigger picture look at scrutiny, that's the one thing I picked up, that it's not, we don't always need to throw all of the old away, which comes to, for me, it's all about recycling. So I hope that answers your question. I did warn you that I tend to go around the houses, but I hope
I
that
love it. I love
answers whatever you asked me in the first place.
No, I think, and then that's a potential nice segue onto a couple of other questions. So you mentioned there about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and some people feeling left out, and that made me think about that article that you read, that you wrote on LinkedIn recently about scrutiny, and you shared the parable about the blind man and the elephant, and how people can have different views and different perspectives, and separately they can be incomplete, but actually we need to bring them together. So actually, kind of further building on that article you wrote, what you're saying is the scrutiny that is evolved is great, but actually we are still kind of this blind men and the elephant situation a bit. Is that right?
Yes. What we actually have, and that analogy to me totally, the parable, in the parable of the blind man and the elephant, it's all people coming to the elephant for the very first time. They're all given different parts of the elephant to feel. So the person that touches the tail thinks the elephant's like a rope. The person that touches the ear thinks that it's like a fan. And what happens in some versions of the tale is they all go away and argue because they all feel theirs is the valid perception. And whether we like it or not, and this comes from the background of what I've studied, we all think that ours is the right opinion because we base it on our life's experience, everything that makes us. So to us, it always seems like we have the right answer, the right opinion. But what we don't take account of is that everyone else has that same view. And they're fully justified in having that view. And I think that what has happened with the current situation kind of feels a bit, and as I say, I don't like to criticise the landlords because they're actually doing a really good job. But most of them. But we've got a situation where we have lots of blind people working in the industry who are leading all tenants to the tail because that's what they've done. So although we've got this new setup, we are still working to the old idea, change it from an elephant to a tiger. yes, we have got used to understanding what we do with the elephant, but we're not actually opening our mind enough to see where it should be going from there. So that to me is the biggest problem, and that comes from the people working in the sector are very, very comfortable with committees and agendas and consultancies and everything. They tend to get a bit nervous when you're talking about new things.
Mm.
Um, and I understand they have huge responsibility, but I just wish sometimes that they would examine what they're doing and possibly see that they are, their requirement to sort of have such a tight definition isn't making scrutiny what it should be.
No, thank you for that. Do you think it's going back to your analogy about sniffing the milk in housing, and maybe it's not just regulations and rules and metrics, but that the structures that we put in place, like you said, it makes the landlord feel a bit more in control potentially. That kind of rigid structure and need to kind of have this specific set process is basically the same as looking at the milk bottle and going, okay, the date's fine, so I'm okay, but not actually sniffing it and giving it that sniff test to go, but is this okay?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And as I say, this isn't to criticise the
Hmm.
landlords. And I have to say, the tenants can fall into the same patterns as well. We are not, none of us are perfect, or we would be living in an ideal world. But it's just about looking and asking whether we can do things differently. And the best way we can do that is to talk to each other and see what everyone else is doing, and that, unfortunately, there isn't enough dialogue at the moment between landlords and their tenant scrutineers. I'm really disappointed that in a lot of cases, the landlord still sets the agenda for what is scrutinised. That is a
Okay.
massive. That is a massive. And my piece on LinkedIn came from, I was guest speaker, keynote speaker at TPAS conference
Hmm.
on scrutiny, and that was the thing that probably hit home. The number of people who came back to me, and as I say, it reflected what I hear when I'm talking to people, is we we might come up with one or two ideas for scrutiny, and our landlords will come back with something totally different. Why not just give it a chance? Give the tenants a chance. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. What have you actually lost?
Mm.
If you're talking about real tenant involvement, engagement, that very chance that you've taken on those tenants surely shows that you are being a bit more innovative, and that you are taking things a bit further, that you're not sticking to the patterns and the policies and the practices that you've been using for a long time. You know, I can only see that it can improve things. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We go back to the drawing board and we do it a different way. If you haven't tried it, how do you know it's going to fail?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize that. And that, do you think that something that you mentioned earlier about the reluctance to relinquish control, and something that I've talked on the podcast a few times with previous guests about, and something I've seen quite a bit, is this historic, present quite a bit of parent-child dynamic between landlords and residents, and it feels like that. If you're talking to your child and saying, okay, well, you can give me some feedback, but only on, what TV did I let you watch today, and what you had for dinner. What you're going to hear, isn't it? It's not going to give
Yeah,
you the answers.
children
So
should be seen and not heard.
yeah.
We've moved on a bit from that, but I mean, I'm asked often to write pieces for different people, and I make it very clear if they're going to rewrite what I say, then they might as well rewrite it if they assume they know what I'm going to say. And it is, and I can't quite get my head around why. I think we're a lot better. The actual staff, the ones that the tenant facing staff, are a lot better. And I also think from speaking, because I speak to a lot of them, and I think a lot of them find the same thing, that they're not given that freedom. And we are talking about freedom, and we are talking about innovation, and we are talking about something new. Because if what we did before was working, we wouldn't have the issues we've got. So, something needs to be improved. And I talk a lot to staff. Yeah, anytime anyone comes in here, that I have a little conversation with them, and I think that they too, there's a lot that they could actually be contributing to the argument. It is almost impossible, unless you're someone like me who knows how to kind of and has a lot of friends within the people at my housing association. It's almost impossible for a tenant to just talk about a member of staff about anything meaningful, and there shouldn't be this big secret. I mean, the other thing I talk about is conspiracy theories, and that comes from this need to control. And it is a parent-child situation. And some of that comes from the way that all social policy has and all areas of society has developed, which is what is my real area of interest since the 1980s, when we are now talking about a pseudo business model. But because we're talking about human beings, there has to be an element of pastoral care as well. And this is something I noticed through, as I say, through the NHS, through education, and now through social housing. So I think everyone's a bit confused. And one of the things, and I get pulled up all the time by other tenants who, when I say, oh, we need this and that, about vulnerabilities and everything, and they say, hang on a minute, all I want to do is pay my rent and get a good service. So because we've got this kind of confusion about, are we a business? Are we kind of a social service? The response to that is the same, that we do get people who, although no one's happy to be called a customer, but we do get tenants who want to be treated in a very similar way to a customer. They don't want people coming in and asking them if they're okay. And yet we have other people who do want to be asked if they're okay. So I think this is where, and then we've got the management and the executive who have still got this parent-child relationship. So we're like a very dysfunctional family,
So I think that's an important point, because like with everything in housing, really, the one size fits all approach doesn't work. So we've touched a lot on the kind of impact of scrutiny and the impact of potentially the lack of scrutiny, and kind of how it's working and how it's not working. In your response to my first question, you mentioned about recycling or upcycling scrutiny, and that's something else that you wrote about in your article. So what are some examples of how scrutiny actually works and worked well now? What are actually some, maybe the activities that you've been up to that help contribute to scrutiny?
I think the most exciting development is I'm now part of Independent East Residents' Voice. Independent East are 5 housing associations: Havebury, Broadland, Freebridge, Orwell and Saffron. We're all in the eastern region, and they are working together. We all have a bit of a fear of these mega mergers, and the fact, this nightmare, the idea of there being 5 big housing associations, because I think we can all generally agree the bigger they are, the more difficult it is to have a personal relationship. So I think what they have, and this is an existing Independent East, they've been working together in this informal alliance for quite a while now. When they're going for grants and funding, they will do it as a group. So, and they've added to the mix this group of tenant scrutineers. We do have total freedom over what we decide to discuss. We base it on the TSMs and the one thing, picking up on something you've said, we are, over the next couple of years, even us as tenant scrutineers are going to have to be more accountable and more transparent, because we have to prove, and we did at the TPAS tenant conference, we actually did a workshop, the IERVP, and they were saying, well, how does this fit into existing tenant scrutiny? How are you showing that you're you're giving added value. And that is something that we are now having found, and it's a very small group, but having found that it's working. And there's some real surprising things coming up, which I think are quite really exciting. But we also need to make sure that we are, because we do have to follow the rules and regulations. Having been on the board, I know all about governance. So it is kind of I think maybe keeping the governance side, it may be more in the background and letting us have that freedom. And at some point, if someone says, well, no, we can't do that. And this, to me, I know I've had a lot of interest from people all over the country about the idea of regional panels. It enables all of the housing associations to keep their own character, to maintain their own ethos, but they can work together. And here in the Eastern region, we have some of the things that we're dealing with are the same as any other housing association or local authority all over the country, but some are very different. We are a rural set of counties. We struggle with transport, with isolation. I can go and listen to a wonderful project that's happening in a London, and there are 20 things straight away that means it couldn't happen where we are. So we have to take those differences while ensuring that everyone gets a good service. We also need to see what we need to put into that to ensure that everyone gets what they want out of it. And that sounds very idealistic. It is, we're not going to achieve everything. If we kind of put aside all these preconceptions, we can do more. So that is something, and what we're doing would be scalable to other areas. We have got some very exciting things, which I can't mention at the moment, in the pipeline, one of which really fascinates me. And I think that is a way forward. And that can also be developed. We're talking about geographical regions. I think that can also be developed if we're looking at different groups, for instance, disability, ethnicity, any of the different groups who maybe they want to have their own. It doesn't have to be about geography. It could be about other things as well. Unite us, and that we have a specific perception of. So I think it could be something that really could go nationwide if we let it. So
it sounds very interesting, and it sounds like a really interesting approach by the landlords and by the tenants involved in it to try and maintain that local character and local ethos and human relationship, whilst also basically covering it with some collective power and resources. And I think going back to what we were talking about one size fits all, that approach where you're looking at what other organizations, other scrutinizers are maybe uncovering and saying, okay, that sounds great, but we can't just blanket apply that here because of X, Y, Z, and that's really important, and that's a hugely important part in the process. So in terms of some practical steps then for landlords or for tenants, whether it's forming some sort of regional collaboration or just trying to get scrutiny started, or at least a bit more recognized, what are some simple steps, or maybe not simple, what are some first steps that people can take to get there?
The very first step, I would like to see landlords coming to us as an engaged group and asking us. We have so much, we talk about recycling and upcycling, we have that knowledge, and I think that's where it needs to start. Taking that analogy of recycling, at the moment we've got a bin of people, I hate to use it, but they feel like they're in a bin of people who feel a bit like they're being excluded. And then over the other side of the room, we have this huge palette of regulations. We have AWAB's law, we have STAIRS, the access to information coming through. We need a way of finding how we can take the things in this bin over here and combine them with the things in this palette and make something meaningful. And I'm trying my hardest, and I'm starting to get somewhere with actually getting them to talk to us. We've got some very common sense ideas. We are very realistic, and I just want us to start to talk together, because we have some ideas of where it can go, how it can be done, how it can be a lot more community based. And it goes back to my idea of not talking about scrutiny. Who's to say that you can't get half a dozen people at a coffee morning discussing what they think could be do better, what they want to know a bit about? That's still scrutiny. And us as being in the community are the ones who do provide that bridge and that extra link. So that's the one thing I would start with, for them to trust us a bit more and for them to talk to us a bit more.
And do you think as well, you sort of touched on it a bit earlier, I think, in terms of, there's obviously, as you mentioned there, trusting tenants more perhaps, and having these conversations, but also then it sounds like the landlords need to be a bit prepared for hearing things that are a bit uncomfortable or maybe a bit messy, and not we've hit this statistic, and that's okay, and just allowing a bit of space for that. Do you think?
Yeah, I think anyone that's seen me on the round table, they know poor Matt. I think he's sort of, when he sees my hand goes up, and some of that is deliberate. I'll be honest, I shouldn't say it, because that's the way. I have had quite a lot of success in what I do. And it is, and I'm sorry, I am one for analogies, but it is the Emperor's New Clothes. I have always been the little boy, and I do think about what I'm saying, although often it doesn't seem like I've thought about what I'm saying. It is about sometimes being a bit controversial. When I first joined the board at Havebury, and I must point out it's Havebury Homes now, they've changed from Havebury Housing, which I am absolutely delighted about. It shows a difference in ethos. It's such a difference. We build houses, we live in homes. But when I was first on the board, we had a walk around on our estate. So I took, including poor Andrew, the CEO, I said, will you all come round? When I saw them all approaching, I said, can you just come? And I was on the board, so I probably should have been out there. But I said, would you mind coming out into our garden? We've got a communal garden. And I then proceeded to tell them how, when I first moved here 8 years ago, there had been a problem with people who were using heroin, and with shops just the other side of our garden wall in this little area that no one, I've been around, no one seems to think they own it, although I did suggest that if I put a garden shed on it, I'd probably find out who did own it, whoever told me to take it down. But I could see poor Andrew, his face, when I was talking about this, what was going on. But I know that the other board members felt that as the first kind of tenant board member, they valued it. They valued that. And they knew, and Andrew knows, that I had the best interests of us all as a whole, because we are a community. Andrew is absolutely fantastic. Most tenants don't know what he does behind the scenes and the interests he has outside of housing. And I often say to them, they're not good enough at PR, at saying, just what they're doing. But I know what I'm doing. I very rarely say something that I'm not in control. It's just that I will say it deliberately to get the debate going. And it sometimes gets me into trouble. I have to make sure that I'm in a space where it's comfortable to say. And I'm happy for people do. I'm always having people disagree with me. And they will tell me I've learned more from listening to what people say is wrong than what I think is right, which comes back to this idea, we're not always right. We have to listen to other people. So it's about having a few people who dare to say things, I think.
Totally agree, and I'm sure Matt welcomes every question you ask on the round table. He introed us to talk on here, so Matt obviously values your perspective, and that's something that he talks a lot about on the social housing roundtable, which is what you're saying, is that we just need to learn how to disagree and debate more, and not be so insulted and affronted when somebody disagrees with us, because that's not how we progress, is it? It's about saying things and going, okay, I think this, and then hashing it out. You may still disagree, but actually it's then just about respecting each other's opinions. And
I think it is a bit of a modern disease. And as someone that enjoys debating, some of the best debates I've ever had are with people who we start from opposite ends from the very beginning. And I must admit, I am known for being a bit of a drama queen, and my friends will tell me something, and it's not unheard of for me to stomp off and not talk to them for half an hour. But I will just have that bit of space, and I'll realise that what they're saying, there's something in there that's important, and I'll go back, apologise for being stroppy, and I will actually take on board what they say. And that's important. There are people, and I have suffered my own fair share of them, who will just, once you put your head above the parapet, you will be attacked. And social media, I have found out, can be a very cruel place.
Yeah.
But most of the people are trying to work towards the same goal in different ways. And we have to look at how those different ways can come together. It can be all input into the one place to make things better. It's common sense, I think.
Totally. Okay, Alicia, we're on to the last question. So, the tradition we have on the podcast, I give everybody or every guest that comes onto the podcast a magic wand, and you get to wave the magic wand around. And if you could do that and fix one thing tomorrow around tenant scrutiny or collaboration between landlords and tenants, what would that be?
Well, I'm going to be a bit cheeky because, as I've told you, I don't always do what I'm told. And I want to change it, and I want to make it a bigger picture rather than about tenant scrutiny, because it all does fit in. And I'm hoping that this magic wand allows me to temporarily stop time.
Okay.
Because the one thing we all need, whether we're tenant scrutineers, whether we're team members, whether we're board members, we need a bit of space. I kind of feel one of the biggest issues is it's like we're all on this hamster wheel.
Yeah.
And over the last week, I have made half a dozen contacts, important contacts that I need to speak to, because they have an important message that I want to be able to talk, including your message. I think you know what I think about. I'm not sure whether I'm infuriated that I didn't know about your service charge program, the thing you've developed before, whether I'm more annoyed that I didn't know about it before, or whether I'm relieved that this is something that should be used. And as you know, we spoke about it before, and it's something that tenants are very interested in, extremely interested in. But we never have the time. And as people have said to me, oh, can you put me in touch with Raj? I want to take this to my landlord. And it's just time. None of us have the time to do things. So if I could just be allowed to stop time on the understanding that the managers and the executives at housing associations must find some time in that little gap where time stopped to talk to us, informed tenants. So that's what I'd like to do, because we are all working incredibly hard. It feels like we're hurtling through. There's a new piece of policy every single week, and we never have the time to let it settle. And that's what went wrong in the 1980s, because we did all this, and I think we're now living with some things that weren't thought through properly in the 1980s and 1990s. So that's my thing for Magic Wand. And also, if I have a bit of space, I can do a few other things that I want to be doing, a few hobbies that I've got in mind.
No, I love that, and I think that's such a powerful lesson. From my experience, I've worked in projects of some sort for the last 15 years, and often, there isn't that space, and the kind of business as usual. I think service charges is a great example of this. And I had someone on the podcast, Dan, who works for a consultancy around service charges, and he said trying to fix something in service charges is like trying to fix a plane in midair, because it never stops, and you don't have that opportunity to pause and do something and go, okay, is that what we want to do? You're just basically like, let's patch this, So we're hoping that we can make all these changes in housing, but then we're not really giving it the space that it needs. And then I think legislation, as obviously crucial and critical, stuff like AWAB's law and other legislation it comes at such a pace these days that the landlords themselves, that, and the media doesn't help this. It becomes this like huge focus for the entire organization, and then that just consumes all the air and all the capacity, and then it's on to the next thing, and then you just,
Exactly.
yeah.
We get lip service because we don't allow the time to let it settle. We don't have the time to discuss it amongst ourselves. And I mean, I've spent the last 3 years helping people with service charge, looking at Section 21 and 22 requests. And we've actually got between us, we've actually worked out the Section 21 bit quite well, actually asking for the information. Every single time, almost every single time, we face an obstacle when it comes to Section 22 because of the costs involved, because the costs that the landlords want to pass back to us as tenants for the admin can be pretty astronomical. And I can understand, as we've mentioned before, it is the most boring job. And I've been there. I've had to be the one looking through invoices and everything. But I have wasted hundreds of hours. And it's only by happenstance that I found out that you have, and this isn't something that we've arranged to talk about, and you're not paying, you're not paying me for doing this. But if you knew, you could have saved me hundreds of hours. If I knew that this thing was available, I, for the last 3 years, would have been saying, well, I think we can do this. I mean, the idea that with this push of a button, that we could actually do it for ourselves and look at in real time at what was happening. It's something incredible. And yet it's only by accident that I found out about it. Who else? I went straight back to TPAS Connect to my tenant people afterwards, first and I said, did you know there's actually something out there? I've said, I've seen it. I can actually press a button and I can get my Section 21, press a button and get my Section 22. But how many of these things are just not, are just whizzing out because we're not allowing the time to do it? We just don't, they're just things that pass by. We never get the chance to focus. And, I don't know how we're going to do it, how we can possibly do it without a magic wand, but I think it's worth trying to see it, how we can, what we can do to make that bit of time.
Absolutely, giving it the space, and actually that, as much as I love that feature of our system, and yeah, as you said, I haven't paid you to talk about it or even encouraged you to talk about it, but obviously very proud of what we've done, and really, really, really passionate about solving these problems around service charges. But that came about because we had a list of requirements to build the system, so that's kind of like your palette. And then we thought, before we want to build any code, we're just going to sit them and watch them doing their jobs for a couple of weeks. And then it was in that process that we watched someone going through that process that you've gone through and just basically downloading these invoices one at a time. And we were like, how long do you spend doing this? Hours, days? And then that just was instantly like, oh no, this needs to be a push of a button. This is just mad. Yeah, it definitely going back to what you said earlier about the palette and the bin, and just kind of trying to join those things up and having the space for all of these conversations. Okay, amazing. Alicia, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you.
It's been really insightful, really enjoyable. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow The Housing Shift on YouTube and Spotify. Please tell your peers about us if you think you'll find it useful. And we'll see you next time.